They were sure they had you. No hesitation, no doubt. In their minds, the trap was perfect, the outcome guaranteed. They had already rehearsed their victory speech, already pictured your collapse. That's how confident they were. But here's the truth. Confidence built on lies is fragile. And the moment you refused to play your role, their whole plan cracked wide open. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the shock of enemies realizing the chosen one didn't stumble where they thought you would. That silence was heavy, filled with their disbelief, their rage, their scrambling to rewrite the ending they thought they controlled. Look around you. The atmosphere has shifted. You can almost feel the weight of their failed plot hanging in the air. It's the kind of tension you only notice after a storm has passed. Everything is quieter, but not because it's calm. It's because your enemies are hiding, whispering, calculating what went wrong. They built the stage, they set the spotlight, and they were sure you would walk into it blind. Instead, you turned that spotlight on them. Their faces gave them away, their rehearsed kindness fell apart, their stories began to trip over themselves. What they thought was flawless became sloppy under your watch. You didn't just dodge the trap, you exposed it. And chosen ones, that's what makes them furious. Not that you escaped, but that you saw through it. You didn't need proof, you didn't need evidence stacked in neat little piles. You read the energy, you picked up the tone, you noticed the strange shift in timing, the too perfect coincidences. You caught the fingerprints they thought they had wiped clean. Do you know how terrifying that is to someone who builds their power on deception? To be seen before they even make their move. That's what eats them alive. Before I go deeper, I want to take a second to thank you for being here. This isn't just about one voice, it's about a collective one. Every like, every comment, every subscription strengthens this message and keeps it moving forward. If you're part of this journey, hit that button, because together we are louder than the traps they set. Now let's press harder. Their plan didn't just fail in private. It failed in the open. They wanted to watch you panic, break down, lose your grip. Instead, you gave them calm. You gave them stillness. You gave them the one thing they weren't prepared for: clarity. That moment when you looked at them, not with fear, not with doubt, but with that quiet recognition that says, "I know exactly what you're doing." That look shook them. It stripped the power from their performance and left them exposed under the same spotlight they built for you. This is why they're furious now, because the trap wasn't just useless, it turned against them. The energy they spent trying to bring you down has backfired. They're the ones sitting in confusion, in frustration, in anger, replaying every detail of how it all fell apart. They thought they could predict your next step. They thought they could control your reaction. But chosen ones don't follow the script enemies write. You don't walk into a cage just because someone dressed it up with flowers. You don't drink from a cup just because it sparkles in the light. You saw the cracks in their story, and you trusted the stillness inside you that said, "Wait, something's off." That stillness is what saved you, and that's why the universe keeps putting you a step ahead. Not because you're paranoid, not because you overthink, but because you've learned to trust what others ignore. The tone, the pause, the shift in someone's energy when they're hiding something. It's a skill born from survival, sharpened through experience, and it's the very reason their traps look obvious to you, even when they look invisible to everyone else. And now they're left with nothing but their anger. Anger that you didn't crumble. Anger that you didn't play your part. Anger that the story they wrote in secret was torn up in public. They are furious because their perfect plan didn't just fail. It made them look foolish, and nothing enrages a deceiver more than being exposed by the very person they thought they could control. So here's where it gets real, because this isn't just a story about a trap. This is about how you saw it, how you dismantled it, and why they're burning with anger now. And if you're sitting here nodding, feeling that quiet recognition in your chest, then you already know this message was meant for you. I want you to pause for a moment and drop a comment below with the number 77, because that number says loud and clear, I see through illusions, I trust my vision, and I can't be fooled. That one action isn't just a comment, it's a declaration, a reminder that you're standing in your power, even while they're losing theirs. And believe me when I tell you, if you are truly walking as a chosen one, you won't just listen to this halfway. You'll feel pulled to stay with me until the very last word, because this story isn't finished. It's unfolding, and every step matters. So lean in, stay locked, because the deeper we go, the clearer it becomes why their rage is proof of your victory. Now let's break it down step by step, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss what comes next. Number 1, they confused your silence with stupidity. Never mistake quiet observation for ignorance. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one you never see coming. They really thought they had you figured out. They saw your stillness, your patience, your ability to let things slide, and in their arrogance, they convinced themselves you were naive. To them, you were soft clay, easy to mold, easy to manipulate, easy to break. They mistook your empathy as weakness, your kindness as blindness, and your silence as stupidity. But silence doesn't mean absence. It doesn't mean you didn't notice. It means you were storing every detail, every slip of the tongue, every fake smile, every crack in their mask. You weren't lost in the background. You were documenting the entire performance. Let's be real. People like this thrive on illusion. They survive by convincing others that they're smarter, sharper, more in control. And when they saw you standing quietly, they thought, perfect, easy target. But that's where they got it wrong. Because chosen ones don't need to shout to prove they see. You were collecting proof in the shadows while they were dancing in the light. You were watching how their actions never lined up with their words. How their energy would shift whenever truth got too close, how their compliments always carried a strange aftertaste of control. They thought you weren't paying attention, but you were studying the very mechanics of their lies. And here's the part that stings them the most. You let them believe they were winning. You didn't jump up to expose them. You didn't waste your breath trying to argue. You didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing you crack. Instead, you gave them rope, and like every fool blinded by arrogance, they used that rope to tie their own noose. Your restraint wasn't stupidity, it was strategy. You understood something they never could. Exposing a liar too early only gives them time to twist, to deny, to make you look like the unstable one. So you waited. You let them pile up their own contradictions. You let them dig a grave so deep that when you finally spoke, there was no climbing out. Doesn't that cut deeper than any insult you could have thrown in the moment? Think about it. They expected you to panic, to plead, to play into their script. Instead, you sat back with that calm that scares people more than anger ever could. Your calm was a weapon. Your stillness was strategy. Your silence was the thunder before the storm. And when you finally made your move, it wasn't messy. It was precise, surgical, undeniable. One word from you exposed the entire architecture of their scheme. That's why they're not just embarrassed, they're terrified. Because if you caught this, what else did you see? What else are you holding that hasn't been revealed yet? Let me ask you something, chosen one. Have you noticed how the angriest people in your story right now are the ones who thought they had you in their pocket, the ones who swore you were gullible, the ones who smirked behind your back? Why do you think their rage burns hotter than anyone else's? It's because they weren't just exposed. They were exposed by the very person they underestimated the most. That humiliation cuts deeper than any direct attack. It's one thing to lose to someone you respect, but to lose to the person you laughed at, the one you called dumb, the one you thought you could manipulate. That humiliation eats them alive. This is where the metaphor lands. You were never their prey. You were the hunter who let the game reveal itself. While they were throwing crumbs to lure you in, you were tracking their footprints in the dirt. While they were staging fake smiles, you were noticing the twitch in their jaw, the tremor in their voice, the way their stories changed, depending on who was listening. They were performing. You were decoding. And in the end, who really held the power? The truth is, people like this don't fear being disliked. They fear being seen, and you saw them completely. That's why their fury is so loud now. They can't erase what you witnessed. They can't rewrite the timeline you already lived. And they can't shake the image of your calm expression when you let them know, without saying much at all, "I knew everything." That look alone was enough to shatter their illusion. Here's the brutal reality they don't want to face. The softness they mocked is the same quality that destroyed them. Your ability to listen, to care, to pick up what others miss, that's what made you dangerous. They thought sensitivity made you fragile, but in reality it made you unshakable because you weren't reacting from impulse, you were responding from knowledge. You weren't flailing in confusion, you were waiting for the right moment to strike. And when you did, it was already too late for them. And now they sit in the ruins of their own arrogance. They replay every conversation, every fake smile, every staged act of kindness, wondering which part gave them away. They lie awake, furious, not just because you escaped their trap, but because you never fell for it in the first place. That's the wound that won't heal. That's the humiliation they can't shake. And deep down, they know they'll never be able to fool you again. So let this burn into your spirit. Their mistake was assuming your silence meant ignorance. But silence is not stupidity. Silence is power. Silence is patience. Silence is the slow, steady sharpening of the blade. And when it finally strikes, it doesn't need noise to make an impact. It leaves scars they'll carry forever. They thought you were 10 steps behind. In reality, you were 10 steps ahead. And that's why they're furious now, because they didn't just lose the game. They never even realized you were the one writing the rules all along. Number 2, you let them build their own cage and lock the door. The greatest punishment for a deceiver is not to be stopped early, it's to be allowed to finish the masterpiece of their own downfall. They thought you were passive. They thought you were too slow to catch on. Every time they moved a piece into place, they looked at each other with smug smiles, as if you were walking blindly into their snare. What they didn't realize was that you weren't stumbling forward. You were watching, step by step, letting them reveal every hidden card, every trick, every intention. You didn't interrupt the performance. You gave them the stage. And in doing so, you gave them enough room to hang themselves with their own script. Exposure requires completion. A half-built lie can still be hidden, but a finished trap reveals its maker. Imagine this: someone setting up a mousetrap in the middle of the room. If you stop them halfway, they'll hide it, cover their tracks, pretend they never intended harm. But if you let them finish, if you let them walk away, thinking they've built the perfect snare, the evidence stands on its own. That's exactly what you did. You let them complete the setup so that when the truth surfaced, there would be no escape, no denial, no, "you're just overreacting." You let their arrogance become the nails in their own coffin. And that's what terrifies them most right now. Not just that you didn't fall for it, but that you let them go so far they expose themselves completely. Had you confronted them early, they would have laughed it off. They would have played dumb, flipped the script, painted you as dramatic, paranoid, unstable. You know the routine. You've seen it before. But you didn't give them that chance this time. You held your tongue. You gave them rope. And when their mask finally slid off, there was no way to glue it back on. Patience is not weakness, it's strategy. Silence is not ignorance, it's evidence gathering. Think about it. Isn't that what makes your power so unsettling to them, that calm refusal to interrupt their play? While they were plotting, you were documenting. While they were staging generosity, you were clocking how their body language never matched their words. While they were faking concern, you noticed the delay in their eyes, the stiffness in their smile, the way their interest in your life appeared out of nowhere, like a performance written on cue cards. They thought you were nodding along, buying the act. But you were the audience member who had already read the script. And here's the question they're asking themselves now. If they saw through this, what else did they see? That's the paranoia chewing them alive. Because they know this wasn't the first scheme. They know this wasn't the first time they staged something against you. But this time they were caught red-handed. And once someone proves they can see behind the curtain, the illusion is broken forever. Imagine this, a spider spinning its web with perfect precision, believing the fly is already trapped. But when the light hits, the spider realizes it's the one tangled in its own threads. That's the scene they're stuck in. They thought the web was for you. They didn't realize they were the ones standing in the center, exposed, unable to move without tearing apart the very trap they built. That's the beauty of your strategy. You didn't resist, you didn't thrash, you simply let them keep weaving until their own pride made escape impossible. And now, with the spotlight shining, the whole stage reveals not your fall, but their design. And tell me, chosen one, doesn't it feel almost poetic to know that the same arrogance they used to mock you is the very thing that destroyed them? They believed patience meant weakness. They believed empathy meant blindness. They believed silence meant stupidity. But you weaponized all three. You let them think they were in control, and that false confidence pushed them into overexposure. They overplayed their hand. They showed their tells. And when the curtain dropped, they were the only ones left standing guilty under the light. Now they can't explain it away. It's too obvious, too detailed, too well documented. Their hands are dirty, and there's no washing them clean. And here's what makes their rage burn even hotter. You didn't respond with the chaos they expected. You didn't beg for clarity. You didn't fight to stay in their narrative. You walked out with composure, clarity, and that terrifying smile that said, "I saw everything, and I don't even need revenge." The worst defeat is not when your enemy fights back. It's when they walk away, leaving you exposed in your own mess. That's why they're furious, because you didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. You didn't crumble. You didn't cry in front of them. You didn't argue or try to prove your worth. You simply let the trap collapse under its own weight and walked away free. That is power, and it drives them insane. They stand there now with guilt they can't erase, evidence they can't delete, and a story they can't control. Imagine this, a magician performing a trick for the crowd, expecting applause, but halfway through, the assistant pulls back the curtain and reveals every hidden wire, every mirror, every secret compartment. The audience gasps, not at the trick but at the fraud behind it. The magician isn't just embarrassed, they're ruined. That's the level of exposure you handed your enemies, and they'll never forgive you for it. So remember this, you didn't escape their trap by accident. You dismantled it with strategy. You knew what they were doing, and you let them finish because you understood the truth. Only completion reveals exposure. That's why your silence was louder than any confrontation. That's why your calm burned deeper than any scream. And that's why they are furious beyond measure now. They set the perfect trap. They thought the story was already written, but you flipped the script. You let them play themselves. And now, the world doesn't see you as the victim. They see them as the fraud. That's the victory they can never erase. Number 3. They built a trap for a ghost, not the you that stands today. The cruelest mistake your enemies make is fighting yesterday's version of you, not realizing that person died the moment you outgrew them. The setup wasn't random, it was custom-made. They crafted it carefully, using the memory of who you used to be. They built it for the one who once tolerated disrespect in the name of love, for the one who swallowed pain just to keep the peace, for the one who ignored the red flags because starting over felt heavier than staying trapped. That's the blueprint they used. But here's the gut punch. They designed their scheme for a version of you that doesn't even exist anymore. They studied your history, not your growth. They thought they knew your weaknesses, but they were studying old data, outdated files, expired information. And while they were building a cage for the old you, you'd already slipped out and grown into someone untouchable. The same pain they inflicted on you once upon a time became the training ground that sharpened your eyes and fortified your spirit. That pain built boundaries they never saw coming. Imagine a thief trying to break into a house with the keys you lost years ago. They slide the key into the lock, expecting the door to open, only to find the lock has been changed. That's exactly what happened here. They showed up with guilt trips, with false promises, with fake loyalty wrapped in sweet words, thinking the door would swing open, but it stayed locked because you are not that person anymore. And doesn't it sting them now? To realize the emotional version of you, the overly forgiving, overly explaining, overly sacrificing version, has vanished. They were counting on the person who would take the blame just to fix everything, the one who would beg to be understood. Instead, they were met with someone stronger, calmer, sharper, someone willing to walk away from what once felt impossible to leave. That's why their plan failed. They tailored it to a ghost. They rehearsed a script for a character that no longer walks this earth. And when you showed up, silent but unshakable, they realized they had nothing. That's what burns them. The realization that growth turned their perfect setup into a perfect failure. They hunted the shadow of who you were, but you arrived as the storm of who you've become. Number 4. They tried to turn your wounds into weapons, but you turned their weapons into ash. They dug through your past, looking for bullets, not realizing you already melted those bullets down and forged armor out of them. They thought they were clever. They gathered pieces of your history like ammunition, convinced your scars would still bleed when pressed. Childhood pain, insecurities, the trust you once gave too freely, the mistakes you made when you didn't know better. They stockpiled all of it. To them, these weren't just memories, they were strategies. They assumed if they pushed the same buttons, they'd get the same reaction. They wanted the predictable you, the fragile you, the version that cracked under pressure. But here's where they miscalculated. You've studied yourself more deeply than they ever did. Imagine a hacker trying to break into a system with old passwords, only to discover the entire operating system has been upgraded. That's what they faced. While they were memorizing your old triggers, you were healing. While they were rehearsing your past mistakes, you were rewriting your patterns. While they were trying to play you with ghosts of abandonment and silence, you were busy learning how to stand in solitude without collapsing. Your past may explain you, but it no longer defines you. They brought up dysfunction, family wounds, betrayal, all thinking it would numb you like it used to, but you didn't go numb this time. You went clear. They expected tears, but got stillness. They expected arguments, but got silence. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence that terrifies manipulators because it means they've lost control. And doesn't it sting them now? They were prepared for the version of you that begged for closure, that craved validation, that would have twisted herself into knots just to earn crumbs of love. But you don't need their apology anymore. You don't need their approval. You built a foundation they never saw because they weren't looking for strength. They were looking for cracks. Imagine this. They walked into the battlefield swinging blades of your past, but you showed up wearing armor made from every cut they left you with. That's why their strategy collapsed. They weaponized what they thought they knew, but you won with what they ignored: your growth, your discernment, your peace. And peace, when wielded by someone who's healed, is the most terrifying weapon of all. Number 5, you didn't just outsmart them, you exposed the hands pulling their strings. When you see the puppeteer, the puppets lose their power. You didn't just beat the people standing in front of you, you went deeper, far deeper than they ever imagined, while they busied themselves with bait, distractions, and cheap emotional tricks. You were tracing the strings back to the source. You refused to get stuck on surface-level betrayal. You weren't just dodging drama, you were dismantling an entire operation. Imagine this, a chessboard full of pawns moving against you. Most would panic at the pieces. You tilted the board until the player behind them was revealed. That's what rattled them. You didn't just watch what they were doing, you saw who was guiding it, the timing, the repetition, the eerie familiarity of their actions. It all exposed a hidden blueprint. Conversations felt scripted. People popped up at perfect moments carrying the same recycled lines. It wasn't random. It was too precise, too polished, too deliberate. They weren't moving on their own. They were being directed. And here's the part that unsettles them most. You didn't react with chaos. You observed with clarity. While others would have been lost in the noise of betrayal, you stayed silent, studying patterns. You realized many of them weren't even thinking for themselves. They were pawns, repeating moves fed to them. Jealousy, envy, sabotage, call it what you will. The fingerprints were obvious. They were being used as extensions of something bigger. Something that had been circling your life for years. That's why the attacks felt personal. That's why they struck so precisely. Most people fight the knife. You looked past the blade and stared into the hand holding it. That's when everything changed. You stopped wasting energy trying to fix people who were already programmed against you. You stopped defending yourself against insults and instead studied the intention behind them. And in that clarity, the mask slipped. The puppeteers were exposed. Once you saw them, the entire performance lost its power. And now they're not just angry you survived, they're terrified you saw, because once the strings are revealed, the game is over. You didn't just outsmart pawns, you caught the one moving the pieces. And that's a truth they can never erase. Here's the rewritten number 6 in 400 words, hard-hitting and sharpened with quotes, metaphorical imagery, and brutal clarity. Number 6. They put on a show, but you read the script before the curtain rose. The deadliest audience member is the one who already knows the ending. They thought they were flawless actors, every line rehearsed, every smile timed, every gesture carefully painted to make you believe. To outsiders, they looked convincing, playing the victim when it suited them, the hero when they wanted applause, the loyal friend when they needed your guard down. But what they didn't know is that you weren't just watching the show. You had already read the script. Imagine sitting in a theatre, the crowd gasping at every twist, every betrayal on stage. But you're calm, almost bored, because you already know how the play ends. That's the position you held. While they delivered their lines with fake conviction, you were catching every pause, every slip, every sudden change in tone. You didn't need hard evidence in the beginning. Your gut was already screaming the truth. Intuition is the rehearsal the universe gives you before the performance begins. So you let them act. You didn't interrupt. You gave them the stage, the lights, the audience. You let them stack their props and plant their false evidence. Why? Because you knew the moment you exposed them too soon, they'd spin it. They'd twist your truth into drama. So you stayed silent, letting the script unfold until they trapped themselves in their own lines. And here's what crushed them most. You were already detached. They thought they still had your attention, your emotions, your trust. But in reality, you had clocked out long before opening night. You were simply waiting for the curtain to fall. That's why when the final scene came, when the betrayal reached its climax, you didn't clap, you didn't cry, you didn't beg for answers. You just walked away. They wrote you into their story as the victim, but you exited the stage as the critic who shut the play down. That's what infuriates them now. They worked tirelessly to craft the perfect performance, but the audience they wanted most, the chosen one, already knew every scene, and nothing shatters a liar more than realizing their script never had power over the person they were trying to fool. Number 7. You let the snake glide in, then you cut its head clean off. Patience isn't fear, it's the sharpening of the blade before the strike. You felt it the moment the air shifted. The tone in their voice grew unnatural, the energy turned sour, the silence started humming with suspicion. That wasn't paranoia, it was awareness. You picked up on the betrayal before it even had a name. But instead of reacting like they hoped, you did something that rattled them to the core. You stayed still. You didn't lash out. You didn't expose them. You didn't give them the chaos they wanted. You simply waited. Imagine watching a snake slither closer, tongue flicking, body coiling. Most people would panic, flail, run, but not you. You knew exactly what it was, and you knew that killing a snake requires precision. If you strike too soon, you miss, and it escapes. But if you let it glide in closer, 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 you take one clean shot, and it never rises again. That's the wisdom you carried. Stillness is not surrender, it's strategy in disguise. They mistook your quietness for weakness. They thought your calm meant fear. What they didn't see was the calculation behind it. While they spun their lies, you logged every detail. While they whispered behind your back, you tracked the connections. While they thought they were binding you tighter, you were letting them write the entire confession in their own handwriting. And then, when the moment came, you moved with precision. No theatrics, no warning, one decisive move, and their whole scheme collapsed. That's why they're shaken now, because they thought they had more time. They thought they were still in control, but you were never playing their game. You were waiting for the exact moment where denial was impossible, where exposure was complete, where the strike would leave no recovery. They counted on your emotions, but you were sitting on strategy. That's why they're embarrassed, confused and furious all at once, because you didn't just survive, you dismantled everything in seconds, and now the snake is gone, its power cut at the root, and they're left staring at the wreckage of their own arrogance. Number 8. They thought your kindness was a muzzle, but you broke the silence with truth. Silence in the face of lies isn't kindness, it's complicity, and you refuse to carry their crimes on your tongue any longer. They bet everything on your softness. They believed your loyalty would keep you quiet forever. They assumed you'd swallow the truth to protect their image, that you'd keep secrets just to avoid conflict, that you'd value peace over justice. And for a time, they were right. You did stay silent. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. You told yourself the drama wasn't worth it. You let things slide, not because you didn't notice, but because you didn't want to be the one to break the illusion. But that so-called peace was never peace at all. It was a prison, and you knew it every time you bit your tongue. They weren't just hiding in the dark. They were hiding behind you. Your kindness became their shield. Your silence became their cover. They were counting on you to be too loyal, too forgiving, too afraid of judgment to ever speak. Imagine being the mask someone wears to hide their ugliness. That's the role they cast you in. But here's where their plan shattered. You hit transformation, that moment of clarity when you realize that silence in the face of wrong makes you a silent accomplice. And once that truth landed, everything changed. You stopped protecting people who would never protect you. You stopped confusing kindness with passivity. You stopped letting loyalty chain you to liars. And that's when their fear began, because now they couldn't guilt you into silence. They couldn't buy your quiet with false love. They couldn't lean on your soft heart to cover their dark deeds. You chose truth over comfort, justice over pretending, and that terrified them, not because you screamed or raged, but because you did it calmly, decisively, with a clarity that couldn't be spun. The truth doesn't need anger to destroy a lie. It just needs air. That's why they tremble now, because you didn't ruin their image. The truth did. And the one thing they thought they had forever, your silence, was the very thing you turned into their downfall. Number 9. They wanted you to explode, but your calm made their mask collapse. When your peace doesn't break, their performance does. They tried everything to make you snap. They pressed on scars, poked at insecurities, slipped insults in under their breath, even staged little humiliations in front of others. Their goal wasn't just to hurt you, it was to bait you. They wanted a scene. They wanted you to lose control so they could point and say, "See, that's the real them." They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for ammunition. But you didn't give them the show. You saw the setup for what it was, a trap designed to use your reaction as evidence. And instead of lashing out, you stood in stillness. You let silence do the talking. You let composure carry the weight. That's what broke them, because the one thing they didn't prepare for was your peace. Imagine someone jabbing at a power outlet expecting sparks, only to find the wires have already been cut. They thought they knew your triggers. They didn't know you had already unplugged them through healing. What they called suppression was really strategy. You weren't scared to fight. You just refused to fight on their stage. And that choice flipped everything, because when you didn't react, their tactics started looking suspicious. Your calm became a mirror. Their tone sharpened, their stories tangled, their mask slipped inch by inch. What was supposed to be your exposure became their unraveling. The spotlight they wanted on you turned, burning straight through them. Your restraint wasn't weakness, it was the trapdoor they fell through. And that's what eats at them now. They wanted chaos. They got clarity. They wanted you to crumble. Instead, they cracked. And the truth came out not because you screamed it, but because they couldn't hold their performance together without your reaction to feed it. You didn't just survive the test. You reversed it. You didn't give them the reaction they wanted. You gave them revelation instead. And that is the victory they can't erase. Number 10. They wrote the script, but the universe flipped the ending on them. The trap they staged for your downfall became the stage for their exposure. They thought they had it all mapped out, the betrayal, the whispers, the perfectly timed collapse they believed would shatter you. Every step was choreographed like a scripted drama. They wanted tears, rage, humiliation. They wanted the final act to be your breakdown. That was the payoff they were betting everything on. But then the plot slipped out of their hands. Right when it seemed like the narrative was leaning their way, the script flipped. Doors they swore were locked against you suddenly swung open. People they had poisoned with lies started questioning the story. The pain they planted to break you became the fire that shaped you into something stronger. Instead of the meltdown they expected, you had a breakthrough that none of them saw coming. Imagine watching a movie where the villain controls every scene. Then halfway through, the reel changes and their entire plan unravels on screen. They thought designing the setup meant controlling the outcome, but they forgot the most important truth. You are not a character in their story. You walk with a purpose bigger than their script, and no manipulation can rewrite that. They tried to direct your downfall, but the performance collapsed mid-scene. And here's what cut them deepest. The very stage they built for your humiliation became the platform for their exposure. What they intended to use against you revealed them instead. Their whispers turned into evidence. Their timing became suspicious. Their perfect plan exposed the patterns they tried to hide. Justice doesn't always thunder. Sometimes it moves in silence, shifting the ground until the liars fall through their own cracks. That's why they're furious now. They thought they'd won, but you didn't just survive. You elevated. You didn't just recover. You transformed. The same setup they built became the mirror reflecting their own corruption. And you walked away, not with revenge, but with alignment, standing calm while their entire performance burned down behind you. Number 11. You weren't placed to break. You were placed to record their every move. Some people are receipts on paper. You became the living receipt they can never erase. They thought you were dropped into that setup to crumble, to be crushed under the weight of betrayal and lies. They believed you were positioned there as the sacrifice, the casualty, but that was never the design. You weren't there to fall. You were there to see. You were there to witness the operation from the inside out. Every whisper, every fake smile, every knife behind the back. You weren't trapped. You were documenting the truth they swore would stay hidden. Imagine being placed in the middle of a storm, not to drown, but to watch who swims, who sinks, and who tries to pull you under. That's what happened to you. They assumed the chaos would bury you, but it sharpened you instead. Every lie exposed another layer. Every betrayal peeled back the mask. Every silence from those who should have defended you revealed where their loyalty truly stood. They thought the pain would break you, but the pain became your microscope. It forced you to study the patterns, the alliances, the system that had been running unchecked for years. And here's what makes them furious now. While they thought you were emotional prey, you were quietly becoming the scribe of their downfall. You stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What's the lesson?" You stopped crying for validation and started noting the evidence. You didn't need screenshots. You didn't need recordings. You became the living proof. Your survival, your clarity, your refusal to collapse. That became the undeniable receipt that their trap failed. They wanted you silenced, but your very existence became the loudest testimony. Now your presence convicts them, not because you shout, not because you accuse, but because you carry the truth in your walk. You emerged not bitter, but clear, not destroyed, but dangerous, because you hold details no one else dared to see. They thought you were weak, but you were positioned there for a reason, not to break, but to bear witness, and that's what they'll never escape. Number 12. Your smile was the silent verdict that broke their script. Nothing unsettles a liar more than the smile of the one who already knows the truth. They thought the setup was airtight, the lies were stacked, the distractions were planted, the people around you were rehearsed and ready. From the outside, it looked like you were being cornered with no way out. They leaned in, waiting for panic in your eyes, waiting for confusion, waiting for you to crumble under pressure. But instead, you smiled. And that smile wasn't ignorance. It wasn't the empty grin of someone too blind to see the danger. It was the calm curve of someone who had already decoded the game. Imagine a poker table where every player is bluffing, certain they've fooled you, until you lean back and smile, holding the winning hand. That's the power your silence carried. A calm smile in the middle of chaos is more terrifying than a scream. That's what they couldn't process. Your expression didn't match the scene they built. You weren't supposed to look steady. You weren't supposed to carry that quiet confidence. But your smile said everything your mouth didn't have to. It said, "I see through all of this. You're not in control here. I already know how this ends." And that's what drove them mad. They had banked on fear disarming you. Instead, your peace disarmed them. Your smile wasn't weakness. It was a verdict. It was the quiet declaration that the setup had already failed. Every time you showed up, calm, unshaken, still shining, still showing grace, even while fully aware of the betrayal, they cracked a little more. Imagine building a stage for someone's downfall, only to watch them stand there smiling like they wrote the ending themselves. That's why they're unraveling now, because that smile stripped the power from their lies. It proved you weren't broken, you weren't flinching, and you weren't playing the role they cast for you. It was strategy. It was evidence. It was your way of showing them that no scheme against you could prosper. Not today, not ever. Number 13. You felt the shift in the air before their betrayal hit the ground. Energy never lies. Actions only arrive late to confirm it. You didn't need anyone to whisper in your ear. You didn't need hard proof or dramatic evidence. Long before their betrayal surfaced in words or actions, you felt it in the air. The atmosphere changed. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was subtle, quiet, unnerving. A pause that didn't sit right. A tone that suddenly carried ice. A silence that once felt safe, now heavy with secrets. Most people would have brushed it off, but you couldn't. Your awareness doesn't miss shifts like that. The frequency was off. The laugh was there, but hollow. The conversation flowed, but without the connection it once carried. On the surface, nothing had changed, but underneath, something had already snapped. That's when you knew the betrayal wasn't coming. It had already started, quietly, in their heart. Imagine standing on a beach before a storm. The sky still looks calm, but the air tastes different. The wind changes. The water pulls back. You don't see the wave yet, but you know it's coming. That's exactly what you felt. They thought they could fake loyalty, fake love, fake presence, until they were ready to strike. They believed their mask was seamless. But energy doesn't wear masks, and your awareness caught it all. So when their actions finally revealed the truth, you weren't shocked, You had already prepared. That inner alarm gave you space to detach, to guard your peace, to step back before the mask fell. They expected devastation. What they got was composure. They wanted you blindsided. What they got was someone who had already seen it in the unseen. The betrayal didn't break you, because by the time it landed, you had already built your shield. And that's what they'll never understand. They thought you were caught off guard, but the truth is, you were steps ahead. You felt the shift before the knife was drawn, and that's why their plan failed before it ever began. Number 14. Their masterpiece was meant to break you. Instead, it exposed them. The sweetest revenge is surviving the storm they built to bury you. This wasn't sloppy. This wasn't impulsive. They didn't throw this trap together overnight. No, this was their pride project, carefully crafted, layered with lies, polished with charm, and fueled by gossip in every shadowed corner. To them, this was the perfect setup, the final blow, the grand finale that would silence you, discredit you, and leave you humiliated. They weren't just hopeful, they were certain. They imagined the scene in detail. Your collapse, your breakdown, your fall from grace. But here's what shatters them. You didn't fall, you didn't break, you didn't beg for mercy or spiral into chaos. Instead, you stood still, you grew quieter, you let your calm stretch longer than their chaos. And while they expected you to self-destruct, you gave them something far worse: endurance. Imagine someone setting fire to destroy your house, only to return and see you standing in the ashes, unburned, building something even greater. That's what you did. You outlasted their performance. The lies started cracking under their own weight. The smear campaign lost traction. The gossip began sounding recycled, empty, unbelievable. You didn't have to defend yourself. The truth began defending you, and now their fury has no ceiling. Because not only did you survive, you thrived. You kept rising when they needed you buried. You kept shining when they wanted you dimmed. Your very presence is a reminder that their grand design, their so-called masterpiece, failed miserably. Nothing humiliates a manipulator more than watching the person they targeted glow brighter in the aftermath of their scheme. That's why they're unraveling now. People are starting to ask questions. Their mask is slipping. The story no longer holds up. And every step you take forward, every ounce of peace you carry, burns them alive with the memory of their failure. They set the perfect trap. They invested everything in it. And instead of celebrating your downfall, they're forced to watch you rise higher than ever. And so, chosen ones, we come full circle. The traps, the lies, the betrayals, all of it was supposed to be your ending. Instead, it became their exposure and your elevation. You didn't just survive, you rewrote the script. Every move they made to bury you only proved how unstoppable you are when you stand in truth. And now, it's your turn. Drop the number 77 in the comments if you know their plan has already failed. Like this video, subscribe to join the movement, and share this message so every chosen one can rise stronger.